Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Committee of Whole for Richmond City for February the 10th. We have 8 people present. Ann Taylor is not available. She's very ill, so she had called me earlier. This evening, we're going to discuss the blight ordinance, and Jerry Purcell will be doing the entire blight ordinance for us to review. We can ask questions, and Justin Burkhart will take over at this time.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming tonight. Ma'am, can we please take the roll?
Doug Goss.
Yeah.
Yes.
Here.
Dr. Lucinda Wright.
Present.
Bill Engel.
Here.
Justin Burkhart.
Here.
Gary Turner.
Here.
Jane Bumbelow. Here. Larry Parker.
Here.
Jerry Purcell.
Here.
All present except as noted.
Yes, exactly. And as Larry Parker said, Ann Taylor is excused from this meeting, excused absence. Thank you, the Committee of the Whole. We are here to discuss the general ordinance amending Chapter 98 of the Richmond City Code. This is a proposed shuttering blight ordinance that Mr. Purcell has put together for us. So I would like to ask him to introduce this, to discuss this, and then we will take questions from council at that point in time. Mr. Purcell.
Thank you, Vice President. Well, tonight brings me to the point of presentation for consideration by ordinance of a plan to begin dealing with the blight and shuttered buildings in our historic community. I began this project over 3 years ago as a firefighter with consideration of the safety of our citizens and all first responders. The next consideration is the unfairness or lack of consideration for the individuals and business owners' investments in our community. The vacant and shuttered buildings are not just a safety issue, but are detrimental to new investment and property values. In a recent conversation with our fire administration, it was stated that there are standing orders for our firefighters to not enter vacant buildings, including our historic business districts. This is a backward approach, but not necessarily by our first responder administration, but the lack of the city's oversight in making sure all buildings are safe for first responders to meet their sworn act to duty. The lack of this ability will lead to excessive risk to our citizens, business owners, and historic districts. This ordinance is basically an update and further organizing of Section 98 of our city code as recognized under Indiana Code 36-7-9. Now, if you'll follow along page by page, I'm just going to give a quick overview of what that page deals with, and you'll have to read it on your own. I'm not going to read, obviously, every sentence of the ordinance.
Thank you.
Page 1 spells out our state and local code that grants the responsibility of this body to consider this shuttering ordinance and the enforcement thereof. Page 2 continues spelling out the responsibilities of this body of adopting rules and procedures as well as oversight of the city resources, including but not limited to police, fire, building code enforcement, local dispatch, and the best interest of our citizens. I would add one of the concerns of the origin of this ordinance was the safety of the citizens and our first responders. Page 3 spells out a responsibility of updating our city code as described and granted in IC 36-7-9 in establishment of effective unsafe building code and to protect the value and well-being of our community neighborhoods. Page 4 begins the definitions of Code 98 subsections A through E. Page 5 is a continuation of these definitions, subsections F through K, and continues with Code 98.04, inspections, then Code 98.05, service of orders. Page 6 continues with Code 98.06, requiring consistent enforcement and lack of authority to vary from consistent enforcement. This page continues with Code 98.7, which gives definition of an unsafe building under Indiana Code 37-7-9-4, subsection A through D. Page 7 continues this definition of Indiana Code 37-7-9-4 with subsections E through K. Page 8 continues this definition as well with subsections L through Q. This page continues with Indiana Code 22-12-1-3, which deals with definitions of alterations, repair, or demolition as established by Fire Prevention and Building Safety Commission of Indiana considerations. Let me read that again. As established by Fire Prevention and Building Safety Commission of Indiana and its considerations. Page 9, updated Code 98.09, establishes an unsafe building fund as per Indiana Code 36-7-9-14A. 98.10 defines contractor. 98.11 addresses the violation of occupancy contrary to other violations. 98.12 establishes registration of defined properties meeting the definition of abandoned. Page 10 is a continuation of the registration of properties, definitions, and explanations of Indiana Code, allowing the same under subsection B, under Section B, subsections 1 and 2, and Section C, subsections 1, 2, and 3. Page 11 is a continuation of the registration of property section. Section D, subsections 1, 2, 3, and 4, and included exceptions to registration fees. Page 12 continues registration definitions and explanations under Section E, subsection 1, 2, and 3. Page 13 continues, again, the registration definitions and explanations under Section F, requiring local ownership of or local property management if owner lives more than 5 miles from our city. Section D, subsections 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Page 14 continues registration definitions and explanations under Section H, subsection 1, 2, and 3. Once again, page 15 is a continuation of Section H, subsections 4, 5, and Section I, subsections 1 and 2. Page 16 continues this registration definition and explanation in Section I, Sections 3, 4, and Sections J and K. Page 17, Code 98.13, unconstitutionality explains that if any part of this is found unconstitutional, it does not affect any other section. Section 98.14, did I explain that right? From a legal standpoint?
Yes, 98.13, everything there on that page and the other pages that are not bold, those were already in our code. So that unconstitutionality, in case there is something weird or court comes back with case law later saying this is not constitutional, then that would assist with keeping the rest of the provisions in place.
Very good. Code 98.14, conflict with other ordinances with subsections A and B. Code 98.15, establishment of unsafe building commission, subsections A, B, C, and D. What this is there will be a commission to, once buildings are registered, to go and inspect those buildings and classify them. Page 18 is a continuation of Code 9815, subsections E, F, and G. And then that page continues with basically housekeeping content of the overall document. In other words, the signature and dating pages 18 and 19. In closing, this ordinance to address the vacant and dilapidated buildings has been a long time in the works. Some will argue that this ordinance equates to government overreach and declaring property rights are or should be without such oversight. In a perfect society, this may be so. But it is evident that we do not live in that world. I do not consider it an individual's right to put others' lives in danger, including our dedicated first responders, or to destroy the value of their neighbor's investment. The key to this ordinance is, and it making a difference, is the commitment to enforcement. I want to thank my colleagues for consideration of how we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Purcell. I would like to, before we go into questions, I would like to just provide my own summary and then expectations for the next phase of some questions that the councilors might have. First and foremost, I appreciate the amending and then creating these thoughts. I think that we all can share a similar feel that, we do have blight here. We do have situations that we wish didn't exist in our community that affect businesses, that affect our first responders, affect folks that are willing to invest, and folks that have invested. So I appreciate the effort that's gone into this. As you said, 3 years. So what we'll do is we'll take questions, and then we'll all try to work together on the next steps of where we want to see this go, whether it be an ad hoc committee, et cetera. So at this point, I'll open up to questions from our council.
Mr. Vice President,
Mr. Turner.
as I read through this morning, for the second time, by the way, I really didn't find the identification of that entity that would be responsible for registering.
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. I did not find a reference, lots of references to a regulating entity, but the entity itself was not named with respect to who would actually carry out the inspection, the registration, and the maintenance of that information on an ongoing basis, because if you read it closely, there's an obligation to return to each of these properties every 30 days. Somebody's got to return to this property every 30 days
That's exactly.
to confirm that it's kosher, so to speak. So, Jerry, is it the Unsafe Building Commission that, an arm of that, or who?
It is the code enforcement that is over the overall enforcement of this.
Tell them yes. And
I should have said yes. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
Director was not able to be here, like you know, this falls under the planning department and the building commissioner. And the Unsafe Building Commission advise them on properties. They're non-paid advisees, just in a commission. But it's under planning, it's not code enforcement.
I think that's correct because again, this has sort of been a multi-year thing. When it was brought to my attention by the administration in '21, Beth and those of you who may remember city planner Ian Vaness, I was advised by them that the intent was to have I&D be the registration authority, but then they work very closely with code enforcement. And then the registering agent would be the individual who's either the owner himself or herself, or somebody over the age of 18 years old who is appointed by the owner to maintain their property and be checking in every 30 days. So it's the registration authority I thought was going to be when Ian Vaness
IND.
IND transitioned, and then I've been keeping Dustin Purvis and Mr. Keller in the loop, but I thought that Mr. Purvis was going to be the registration authority, but that he still works with, obviously, the building commissioner, who administers 3679, and obviously code enforcement, who is the delegated enforcement, who's pounding the pavement out there doing the
The
inspection.
3 inspectors could inspect, but Elvis would go through IND. When I say a planning director, that's the same person. Planning director and IND is the same person, so.
Mr. Vice President.
Yes, you follow up.
I also noticed that this references the Department of Code Enforcement as though we've actually created an enabling ordinance that establishes it as a department in this city, and we have not.
There are certain references throughout the code to a code enforcement department. So even though it's not been recodified during the new codification process yet, it is an existing department, at least from the administration's perspective.
Yes.
I don't know if I said that
We
right.
need to
but-
finish the codification project. That would help. Yes.
Would help immensely.
Working on that in the law department, are we?
No, yeah, I think Chloe and AJ and the mayor have, and council have all been working on that.
And may I,
Yes.
Mr. Vice President, on page 4 of 19, it references department, and that refers to the department in charge of enforcing all building, housing, and related codes in the city of Richmond, Indiana, or refers to the Department of Code Enforcement, where enforcement duties are delegated to code enforcement by the mayor or by the Building Code Division. I think that clarifies a lot of that.
Can I ask for a little bit of clarity from the is it 2021 conversation?
Right.
So you were saying that the property owner would self-register with whom in the city?
At the time, it was Ian Vaness, but it would still be the Department of Infrastructure and Development through Dustin Purvis as the director of that department.
And then, if I'm following, after 30 days of, or after not hearing and 30 days passing, then code enforcement would check in on the status because they haven't re-registered or re-upped.
They would work together and communicate with each other.
Okay.
Because yes, if there is no registration, and then code enforcement has to go out and assess the property and see what's going on. Is it vacant still? Is it not vacant? Is it quasi-abandoned? We don't always know. We have to look at it from the outside.
Okay. Just for the purpose of the conversation, I wanted to outline maybe some of the discussion from then as it relates to now. Mr. Engel, did you have a?
Yes. I'm not sure that this clarifies it for me, and I don't know if a memo detailing who specifically we're talking about would help, but I still don't understand who's the registration authority and who's the enforcement authority.
Registration authority would be Infrastructure and Development.
So it's Beth Fields.
I think it would be Dustin.
It'd be Dustin? Okay. Okay, who's the enforcement authority then? It's not the Unsafe Building Commission, is it?
The Enforcement Authority is the administrative branch, so it would be the department or the Division of Enforcement Authority.
The Division of Enforcement Authority, who's that?
That would be.
Is it the planning
well,
department?
Matthew Keller is the department head over that?
Statutorily, it has to ride with the building commissioner.
Yes.
But the people who go out and do the inspections are the code enforcement inspectors. But the building commissioner has the statutory authority and runs the unsafe building commission meetings, who works for IND. They're all in one department. Code enforcement's just across the hall.
Okay,
So there's one building commissioner, there's 3.5 inspectors, so 3.5 inspectors, while they're doing their other duties, would obviously check on these as requested by IND.
which leads me to my next question, following up on Mr. Turner's question. This creates a lot of work for somebody, right?
Yes.
And didn't we downsize that code enforcement department? Isn't there,
Just got her back full-time, so no, we're good. No, the only thing you downsize is the director is also the director of, and that's Matt Keller. So he's their director, and he's not an inspector. He's an actual director. So no,
Okay? But
3.5
again, we're,
inspectors still.
again, I guess the importance of this
Yes.
ordinance, and I compliment Jerry for the work he's done. I think this is a great idea. I just wonder if we have an estimate on how many properties are we talking about? Are we talking about 5, 50, 500? I just wonder, and following up on that, I just, there's no sense in creating a new ordinance that we're not going to enforce.
Right.
If I may, that brings me to another question from another director who also could not be here tonight. And so, yeah, wipe your hands, Lysol, all that stuff. Maybe a decade ago, we entertained the idea of a landlord registration program
Yeah, I remember.
to register rental properties.
Right.
And there was a fiscal analysis done by an outside party that deemed it way too expensive, put it in plain terms. There hasn't been one for this, and that director would strongly recommend you consider this. A complete fiscal analysis of would it sustain itself, would it pay for itself, or would it add extra costs out of the general fund? That's a question that needs to be answered.
Agreed.
And then also, Mr. President, there are references to violations on page 15, number 5, failure of an owner to provide proof of insurance would be a violation. What does that mean? Are we fining someone?
So there would be, there could be fines for failing to register, failing to have an agent, failing to provide proof of insurance, and things that would fall under the home rule part of the Indiana code. And then everything else, which would be under the abandonment statute, that's 36,736, I believe.
So
It is.
I have a question. So
Did you answer my question? I
don't know.
I'm not sure about that.
So there are two fine schemes. I don't like that word, but there are two fine possibilities. One set under home rule, one set under 36,736.
So it is established somewhere, it's written somewhere that we would know what the fines are for that.
That table. There's a table of fines,
Okay.
right?
I don't know if Ian created a table of fines, but it's actually in the code which fines would be applicable to,
It was in your email.
was in the email, was it Ian's?
No, it was you.
There was a fine comparison.
Yeah, comparison, I'm sorry.
Okay, Ian put that together in
Okay.
21.
The fines are listed there in 4 and 5, aren't they?
Am I looking at the wrong one? I got the earlier version of this.
Yes, they are. Or are they? No, they're not.
You've got your standard home rule language in there. I believe it's $2,500 for a first offense and up to $7,500 for a second and
Page what?
15.
The one you got
Little
in the
straight
other
here.
hand,
It is little.
Intentionally.
That's the state law.
Why?
I don't recommend that.
My question, though, is
I don't recommend it.
failure of an owner to, or is it, to appoint a contact liaison is a separate violation of the section, and a failure of the owner to make certain that the appointed property manager is available. I guess it's a violation. So, is there a fine associated?
So a fine could be up to $2,500 per state law. When I had coached the prior department head from a couple years ago, I kind of warned him that this is Richmond, Indiana. You might not want to come out $2,500. You might want to start out $200, $300, work your way up. Just because you can find something $2,500 doesn't mean you would want to. And when that came up again recently, I said you would need to talk to the new director, kind of work out what he would think would be reasonable, talk to the mayor, make sure that we're not trying to go after people for such a large sum of money on the first hit.
Right.
Okay, well,
Well, Bill,
I think it would be good to
the
identify.
2,500 and the 7,500 actually
But-
relates to whether they fail to register. If they fail to register, they're subject to these rather onerous fines.
Right.
You asked about insurance.
And I asked about insurance, and I also asked about
And I don't find
establishing
fine.
a liaison,
Right.
that if you don't, it's a violation, and I don't know what's the violation. What does
There's
that
no
mean?
fine identified under the insurance
That's what I'm saying.
provision.
Right.
and
That's
maybe
what I'm
the
saying, and I just wonder if we
Yeah.
shouldn't identify that.
I have a question. I mean, well,
Go
or
ahead.
it could be a statement, but I remember being in a conversation with a home or a property owner before, and there are a few of them that are self-insured. And also, they said that the insurance was too expensive, and so they chose to be self-insured. And so would that mean that they would have to go and get, they would have to go ahead and get this property insurance and pay those premiums? Or can they, if they choose to be self-insured, if their properties are paid off, they're self-insured? Or
We've got language in other codes that says that in lieu of a insurance, they can file a letter of credit
Okay,
where they get a bank letter of
Okay.
credit. And then to kind of not backpedal, but to go back to Bill's conversation, I want to make sure I'm in the right section here. So it's letter I3,
On what page?
might be page 16 or 15, depending on which draft you have in front of you.
That's the old one. It's 15, isn't it?
Whereabouts in three?
I'm under I.
So
I-
right in the middle of that paragraph 3, it says, for purposes of clarification, any other violations by an owner which exist, namely failure to appoint, oversee a property manager, failure to maintain insurance coverage, or an owner's failure to provide an updated registration information, shall be deemed a separate violation subject to that cap. So again, it's gonna be lower depending on what the mayor and the departments decide. But we wanna have that cap in there for state code, home rule purposes. I think council has done that before with other, violations of just a general nature. They wanted to make sure that that cap was in there to comply with home rule.
Vice President,
Mr. Parker?
I have a question on page 5, and it also was the same as on 19. On page 5, under K, the clear board, the plastic product, almost a quarter of an inch thick, is that what we are going to put on? Or we're going to try to make the homeowner put that on?
The idea of this is to make the homeowner put it on when they're boarding up a property rather than structure wood, because of the safety issues involved with using structure wood for exit and for not being able to see inside the building for our first responders when they pull up.
Okay, so if that's on there, they'll enter then, right?
No, if you look, there's very clear definition of how it's to be installed.
Yeah, there sure is. 2x4s and everything else. My other question, I guess, is on page 14, it says here on number 3, how you're going to do it with 2x4s and so on and so forth. 6 lag bolts, 7 inches long. And it says windows, doors, and other entrances. So are they wanting to put the clear plastic on the door?
Not if the door's intact, no, nor over windows that are intact. These are for the buildings that are boarded up because the windows have been broken out or burned out.
So if they have windows, they don't have to do this?
No, no.
just be on the broken,
Mr.
boarded.
Buildings that are boarded up.
Mr. Parker, and possibly as a reference, we could use the Reedmore property prior to what it's undergoing at this point, how there were missing window, which was letting weather in and things like that. Something like this could also help structurally keep the building intact for any kind of future use as well. But if I'm hearing you correctly, and please let me know if not, this would go over top. There would be some sort of instruction manual, and possibly some references of assistance to help install some of these fixtures, but to really kind of have a set way of doing this so that our first responders possibly know of what they're getting into to enter these buildings in case there is a call for emergency. Am I going in the right direction with that?
Well, somewhat, but at the same token, you know, if the windows or the doors have this clear plastic on it so that they can see in, I don't know why they wouldn't go ahead, if there was a call, why they wouldn't go ahead and go in, because that was supposed to be the reason they didn't go in, is because they couldn't see in. So now they can see in, and if they have an emergency call, I think they should either go in or let's forget about this part here.
No, it absolutely, the whole code is about them being able to safely go in once this is enforced, that we know the condition of the buildings. But the clearboarding, the whole concept of that is that the neighbors can see what's going on inside.
They can see
The
if
police
somebody's
officers can
squatting.
see, right, yeah, the first responders can see what's going on, and when they pull up, they can see what they're getting into with the clearboarding. And that's the whole object of the clearboarding, is to make the property not closed up in a way that people can squat, start fires inside without anybody being able to see or notice it. So it fits a number of issues. Now, one of the things that's not been clarified, which I want to, is this commission that will be established on page, page 1798.15. And that commission will be a volunteer commission. Once the buildings are registered, that commission will go out and inspect the buildings and determine whether or not they are viable or not. And if they're not viable, then the code enforcement will have to deal with them, or at whatever stage they are in safety and construction, the code enforcement will have to deal with that. In other words, if the building's not viable, why is it still standing? Why isn't it got an order to come down? And that's what that commission's task will be, and that commission will start doing that, and it's spelled out how it'll be set up once all the registration is done and inspection of every one of the buildings.
Also on page 14 of 19, under 2, and free from snow and ice on the walkways. I agree 100%, that'd be wonderful, but we don't enforce it now. And we can't enforce it because we don't have an ice or snow police. So is there really any sense in pretending we're going to do that?
I don't want to pretend we're going to do anything, so either you know, the old saying is either you enforce it or you take it out. You don't let it lay unenforced, because then that creates questions on all of the codes that we set if we don't
Well,
enforce.
This has been on the books forever, on this ice and snow in front of your house.
I did have an insurance agent ask, the city's insurance company asked me about that 5, 6, 7 years ago. She wanted to make sure we had something on the book, so I sent it to her. Please don't ask me what her name was or what year it was. It's been a while.
Yeah.
I think they do like to know that these are on the books.
They're on the books, we just don't enforce them.
Mr. Vice President.
Mr. Patel?
I noticed this with the people coming back from Walmart, et cetera, into Ravina Park, and there's literally no sidewalk for them to walk on, so they were walking on the road, which is very dangerous. And downtown, now with the narrower sidewalks and the extra parking, there's no place to put the snow downtown. So it needs to be removed in a different way. And I would say the same applies to a lot of our neighborhoods, that we need to remove the snow, not push it up on the sidewalks. Because that's what's normally blocking the sidewalks, is the snow we push up on them. But that's a whole nother subject. Sorry.
Well, not really.
Well, no, it's in here, right. How do we enforce it?
Yeah.
Now, Mr. Vice President,
So,
I would like to say that I don't expect this to necessarily go through intact. I've got a lot of time and energy in it, but there's always room for other people's thoughts and input. And I think, and that's what I think the Vice President was referring to here at the start, where do we send it for here and start reviewing it to look at the different things that we've discussed tonight, to have that committee look into, do we delete things or do we spell them out clear, et cetera, and who that group would be.
Mr. Vice President?
yes, Mr.
I think, clearly, I think we're going to want to narrow the scope of this. And the first step, in my opinion, is an assessment of just how large is the problem. How many places do we have that are likely to fall under the aegis of this ordinance? And kind of where are they? I just happened to walk, well, I walk every day, but just this past couple of days, I've picked out 3 or 4 buildings on South E, 4 or 5 buildings on Richmond Avenue that are obviously vacant and haven't been occupied forever. And they're perfect examples of what do we do with them. And the windows are still intact, the doors are still intact, but they have been empty for way more than 45 days, years, in fact. And so I don't think we want to start tearing down things that aren't dilapidated to the point where they need to be, just because they've not been occupied. So that feature of the ordinance really needs to be cleaned up so that we don't have that issue. And I even thought of the shopping center on the west side of Richmond, across from the drugstore. It's got 5 vacant bays that have been there now for 5 or 6 years. And we don't want them to fall under the aegis of this ordinance. And so that aspect of it needs to be tweaked, I think, to make it clear to people who own those places that we're not going to come shut them down because they haven't been able to find tenants
Right.
for the
Right.
space.
And that is spelled out under the fact that the enforcement department can vary by common sense.
Well, that would be common sense.
Yes.
Right.
And also, Vice President, I would like to say, if it's okay?
Yes.
That's once again where this commission comes in, and no one's going to tear down a viable building. That is not the object
Yeah,
here.
right.
The object is to tear down the buildings that are no longer viable. They're just sitting empty or burned out, et cetera. The other is to classify the buildings as something that can be restored or what kind of work they need so that we can start looking at how they get back in service. So your point's well taken.
And if I may, a personal plea to this council body. I think this is a great starting point, and I applaud this. And Mr. Parker brings up a really good point here as it relates to the snow and the ice. What kind of community do we truly want to be? Do we want to be a community that says we can't figure this out, take it off the books? Or do we want to be a community that says we have to figure it out? We have an aging population. There are disabled people in our community that depend on some of these safe ways of travel, whether it be sidewalks, crosswalks. But in order to navigate our city, to visit some of our businesses, et cetera. And so I think I've had my own personal experience from specifically our historical uptown Richmond, once with Dr. Wright, where there was a situation where the building was in very bad shape. and would appear to me, a non-first responder, as a dangerous place to enter. And I know that's not a community that I want my kids growing up in. I know that's not a community that is going to be able to recruit easily new families, new businesses. And so my plea is that if we use this as a jumping off point, a starting point, to say it's important to us to look at these fine details. It's important to us to find a way where we don't block pathways, but we remove the barriers for the future of our city. And so I know there's a lot of fixing, updating definitions per se, but I also think that it's a wonderful thing that we're here talking about this, because I think that we do need to be strict with our standards. We do need to enforce what we want to see. And so I think this is wonderful, and I think these questions have been wonderful. And so, Mr. Purcell and the fellow counselors, I'm excited about this, and I hope that we can move this on to the next phase, because if we want Richmond to be great, it's going to start with defining what great looks like.
Very good.
Did you have some?
To address Gary's concern, Indiana Code 36.7, 36.10 defines the exceptions for abandoned structures. That includes the actively being offered for sale, lease, or rent.
That is
So-
stated in the variances in
That's
this
stated.
ordinance.
Yeah, and I think you guys were all handed the copy of the Indiana Code that this was referenced, and that would be 36.7, 36.10. It talks about the fines, the first paragraph, and then it says, unless documentation has been filed, approved by the enforcement authority that it indicates the owner's intent to eliminate the vacant structure or abandoned structure, and goes on. But one of the things listed is actively being offered for sale, lease, or rent.
That's it.
So the empty retail in the strip mall there there's signs out there,
They're fine.
so they're fine.
Thank you, Mr. Goss.
Yes, thank you.
What other questions?
Mr. Vice President,
Yes, Mr. Engel.
have we considered the cost of this? Do we have any idea? Will it be additional cost? I think it's fairly aggressive in terms of dealing with this situation that I absolutely agree with Mr. Purcell and Mr. Burkhardt on, that we should be looking at this, and this is a great start.
Right.
I just wonder if we're capable, or are we adding a budget line that's going to address this? Somebody's gonna get more work out of it, I'm pretty sure.
Mr. Vice President,
Yeah, Mr. Purcell.
under 98.09, it establishes an unsafe building fund.
Right,
Now, how that's funded,
but that money is
Well,
collected is gonna go in the general fund, which didn't make sense to me.
well, it can be reappropriated over here, but it has to initially go into the general fund
Okay.
from these fines, et cetera.
All right. I'm sorry?
Statutory, it would be an 1,100 account general fund, but it would be its own fund.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
3,000 things under the general fund.
And yes, there will be quite a bit of cost to this in the long run, because once you establish the buildings that need to be torn down and identify them, they'll end up belonging to the city because the owners will abandon them. And that's just a point of reference that happens whatever city tries to clean up the blight. I hope that's not the case, but that's real world. And obviously, I have visited cities that have introduced similar legislation, South Bend being one of the cities that this is how they cleaned up their cities with similar ordinance. And I visited 3 different cities at the time I was writing this, and each of them have cleaned up their blight with but you have to enforce them. If you just write them, they don't fix anything.
Right.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Engel?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Goss?
Mayor, a couple questions, and these, you probably may or may not know the answer off the top of your head, something you can get back.
Well, my directors gave me some talking points, but they couldn't be here.
How many properties, individual properties, did we have weed violations in the last year?
We issued 482 tickets. 22 of those were paid, so we collected all the $5,000 out of a $700,000 budget. But no, I mean, we got to do code enforcement. 220 weed violations, weed liens were filed with the county. 220 weed liens were filed with the county because they never paid the fee for us mowing the grass. Average cost of that's $300 per lien. And you're right, if it ends up as a property that gets abandoned, goes through sheriff's sale, doesn't sell, goes to commissioner's sale, all those liens are wiped off. So we expect to recoup 10 to 20% of those every year. That they actually, people will actually pay and sell the property, not go to commissioner's sale. So, I mean, we try, and you have to do that. Statutorily, we follow a process to get these things filed. And filing those liens helps push the owner to either fix it or let it go to someone else who will fix it.
The second question, how many properties last year did we board up?
I don't know. He gave me an annual report, but you probably didn't bring it tonight, did you? Probably on his phone. Yes, he gave me a good summary report he can share. I do have, if you want, I reached out to other mayors around the state also and to their enforcement personnel, so if I may. Unfortunately, this one particular city, the mayor and their executive director of planning, zoning, and code compliance, I forgot to ask if I could say their name, so I'm not going to put their name out there and put them on the spot, but I'll give you details. The mayor came to their director and said, hey, we've had this ordinance for 20 years. We really haven't done anything with it. Would you take off with it? So this person did a few weeks ago, and it's timely, just 2 weeks ago, mailed out letters to residential and commercial property owners. About 25% of the residential ones sent the registration forms back. They're like, this is okay. Maybe we're onto something here. The commercial ones, as of Friday, a third of them had called them and said, they're not vacant, they're not abandoned, we're using them as storage warehouses or for other purposes, and they don't have utility service because the use does not necessitate it. So you need to look at your ordinance closely. Your commercial properties will be the hardest ones to enforce. You have the biggest fine, the biggest potential to reap some rewards and pay for this. But they're the easiest to say, it's listed under state statute for lease or sale, but lastly, they use it as a warehouse or storage, and they don't have to have utilities to use it as a warehouse or storage by state statute.
So I have a question, if you don't mind. So if they've done that, was there a process they had to go through to be able to reclassify what they're doing in that building? Like if, I mean, I look at that fire that we had here and everything's stored. If it's a business and it's no longer functioning as a business, but yet they're using it for storage, is through that process, did they have to go through an application process to be able to change what they're doing in that building? I mean, because.
No, it's commercial, can be used for any general commercial use.
Okay,
As
so
long
they
as
can
it
just.
falls under the UDO uses, and storage, warehousing is acceptable.
Well, but there's separate fire codes for storage.
I know, so I'm just telling you, you need to spend some time on this, or you'll.
Oh,
You'll
absolutely.
get taken like they're just now getting taken. They didn't realize their ordinance didn't help them
Whether,
on the commercial properties.
But there is
By
case
state
law that
statute.
talks about how even though you might be using it for storage, if a commercial property is letting it become dilapidated.
Right.
And weeds.
Yes.
There's case law that says, well, you may be storing it, you may be occupying it to some extent, but.
Still needs to be maintained and secured. You have that,
Yeah.
yes.
Mr. Vice President.
Mr. Purcell.
Another thing that addresses this is your commission again that inspects that building to make sure it is still sound. It is still structurally sound, et cetera, because to hide behind that veil of we're using it,
Oh, I know.
we can still inspect it.
We were getting some really good advice from another city.
No, absolutely, absolutely, I agree.
You got a chance to do this differently, do it differently than we did it.
And the commission meets every Tuesday, every third Tuesday at 10 o'clock. So I was actually going to pass this ordinance out to them next Tuesday and let them know how their role as a commission would be filtered down through code enforcement and through this new registration authority. That way, they know that they're going to be a part of that, even though it's mostly from a hearing authority standpoint, but that we're definitely, the administration and the executive branch will be having the code enforcement department on the street pounding pavement.
Mr. President, or Vice President.
Mr. Cross.
Back to my third question.
Okay, you only get 3 now.
You know, a number of boarded up properties that we boarded up and a cost of those properties the cost of boarding those.
We need to do that fiscal analysis that has not been done yet.
I'd like to know those numbers. How many we boarded up last year and what was the?
We
cost?
know that, but we don't know, I mean, we can,
99.
99.
right. And we know how much the overall budget was, but we can't tell you how much these 99 costs.
It's not
We
broken.
know how much the whole department budget was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr.
We
Vice
haven't broken it down, but we might be able to figure that out, as
Yeah,
purchase
that would-
orders.
I think would help,
Might be able to figure out from materials purchased.
yeah.
Mr. English.
I know,
Laserfish.
Right.
Yeah.
And it would be important for us to have a list of those to add to our registration list and the follow-up. Mr. Vice President,
Mr. Purcell.
well, even today, and Kim, this may be a question for you, Southeast Street, there was a fire, in about the 700 block? The whole top of the building's burned off. The lower doors are boarded up. It's been setting now for 3, 4 months? What's our recourse on that? It's a structurally, in my opinion, the only thing they could do is tear, and this addresses what the weight loads, et cetera, have to be on these buildings and the repair of these buildings. But if you look at that building, it's gonna take total reconstruction of the second floor, minimum, plus the other damages from the water, et cetera. And then you have a house on South 11th Street that has been burned out for multiple years, that we plywooded up, I know, because the plywood's been removed, and I've worked through your department to get the plywood put back up. And hopefully it'll be clearboard in the future if we work with the local vendors. So we've got a number of buildings right now, the 2200 block or 2000 block of East Main. There's a building that a tree fell on 4 or 5 years ago that has tarps over it. What is the follow-up?
So we do have our unsafe building commission in place, and Sherry can attest to this, but we have what we call pre-hearing orders. We have to go through the process in Indiana Code 3679, and we get title searches so that we can serve and give due process to the owners and all interested parties, known or recorded of record. And so they do a pre-hearing order. We set it up for an automatic hearing if we're going to tear it down. If the building commissioner confirms that it is an emergency, we can usually bypass that process. I don't like doing that unless the building commissioner has said, yeah, this is structurally, it needs to come down, or unless we can clearly see, and Sherry can, send me a picture, or the other 2 inspectors can send me a picture showing that it's leaning, and it's eminently going to fall down on its neighbor, or on an alley, or on sidewalks, or it's in a even when it's in a neighborhood where there's schools, churches, and children present. So we go through our unsafe building commission process. We get that mailed, recorded, published, set it up, go to unsafe building commission. They can either affirm it, they can deny it, or they can affirm it with stricter modifications if the individual shows up to the hearing. And again, we do these hearings every third Tuesday at 10 o'clock. And I think they're even, WCTV has been recording them since '24.
So I have a question, Kim. As I heard a statement made about Laserfish going through receipts, is there a file, an electronic file for, this information? Because as taxpayer dollars go, I mean, I don't want receipts in the drawers and things like that to where, there's not a database of where these monies are being spent.
I'm not sure how can be compiled, but we have something called BS&A, which is our purchase order accounts payables. I don't know how they run reports, but all the receipts, accounts payable, and I think Matt had said something about researching that part, but I don't know how they would track internal, where it was done internally, where we didn't hire a contractor, but it was done internally where staff boarded everything up.
Well,
That I don't know.
Jerry goes in, the maintenance crew supervisor, and goes into BSNA and puts that he went to a property and what he did to it. So and then he'll say like maintenance cleaned it up, or maintenance did this or that, and then he'll say, abated or whatever. So
Okay, so it's in BSNA.
Yeah.
I just don't know how to generate reports of that nature
right.
in BSNA, but that might be something that,
And then also, whenever
Okay.
we do a cleanup or tear down a building, we put all that information in there. The contract is in there. When we go to recoup the money, Kim will do a certified statement of unpaid costs of how much all of that costed as well.
Okay.
So most everything should be in BSNA, and we also keep a hard copy of everything as well.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Engel?
Well, I was just going to make the point that the Parks Department was boarding up houses because we got a report every month. I'm on the park board, at how many houses they boarded up. But this might be a year or two ago, unless it's changed.
Code enforcement's been established, I'm unaware of Parks Department doing that.
I think that got switched over in 17 when
Okay.
the new department was
That long
created.
ago.
I think. Please don't quote me on that.
Okay, we're now an hour in. What other questions, if any, on this? And if any, what is the council's pleasure as far as the direction that we want to go?
I think we should parse it into work tasks and assign it to appropriate committees. I think finance should track down what this is going to cost. I think public safety ought to address the definitions to ensure that they're consistent with what we want. And to the point that you're making, snow removal ought to be part of that conversation because
But it doesn't snow.
I mean, that is,
It's a pride thing,
Well,
having pride. in-
as a walker, I found myself out in the street myself.
Yep.
It's not fun
Or safe.
or safe,
well, and for our children's sake too, when they walk to school.
right?
Mr. Vice President?
Yeah, Mr. Purcell.
In closing, I do want to say this for all honesty and transparency. In working with other cities and discussing this, by the time we get all the properties registered and we start doing this enforcement, we're going to end up with a lot of buildings to tear down that are unsafe. And there has to be a fund to do that. And I know that South Bend set aside $6 million for tear down at the end of this application of this ordinance. That's just, I want to be real with everybody, that there is an end cost to this if we're going to follow through. And then you have to figure out where those funds are going to come from and how you're going to produce those funds. And then that becomes a matter of what is your priority. And the real world of tax caps and our income and our other departments.
Right.
But that's where this is heading, to be honest. It is going to be expensive in the end if we want to clean up the city and the blight,
If that's our priority.
if that's our priority.
Redevelopment would be normally where you would look for funding for some of this, but believe me, we've committed virtually
Good.
almost every dollar that we have foreseeable to Alder Beerman and a variety of other very important development projects.
And I think there's also a long-term cost of tearing down these buildings as well, because like we found with the blight elimination projects, the neighbors next door to these properties don't want the property because then their taxes will increase. And then, then we have to pay to mow the grass for years, and that property's not generating any property tax on top of it. So, when we tear these down, we are tearing down our tax base, and I think we also need some sort of program to prevent the blight from happening just as much as we have a program to deal with the blight.
Yep.
Mr. Vice President.
Mr. Purcell?
You're absolutely right, and that's where the initial classification of these properties, being savable or not, and then you establish your list of tear downs, and then the enforcement of this stops them from continuing to fall into blight, to fall into decay. That's the whole idea and purpose of this. And I've always said that once we clean up the city and we start encouraging development within our city of new houses that are affordable, et cetera, that we can give these properties to someone that comes to us that's a developer with a plan and showing us the financial capability, even if it's small contractors here in town, and give the properties away. The mayor and I discussed this during the campaign with all the properties that the city owns. Someone comes to you with a plan and shows you the financial capability, give them the lot.
I don't want to leave you out, Dr. Wright.
No, I'm just sitting here thinking, what Mr. Purcell was saying in giving. If you have, if we develop some kind of program. Back in the day, there were block grants, low-interest rate loans to someone who is willing to, maybe they have a little bit of money, and we have a program that's going to help them. Some of these houses, because some of these abandoned buildings have good bones. They just need some TLC and somebody who cares and somebody who's willing to work them to improve, to have some affordable housing. We have to start thinking about, and by the way, that'll get them back on the tax roll. Just saying, we have to start thinking about our residents and how we can best service them, because without the residents, there's really no community. I mean, the community will die. I mean, let's just be real. So preventive, yes, we do. We need to figure out how we can eliminate, how not only clean up the city, but have a plan, working together and trying to find a way, be proactive instead of reactive, because right now we're being reactive. And when you're reactive, it's costly. And it is costly. So we need to be proactive and work together and get the job done for the people who put us in these seats.
Mr. Vice President? First of all, I'd like to thank Jerry for all the hard work he's done,
Amen.
even though we beat you up a little bit.
Not a bit.
It's all right.
But I think this is a good start, and I think that Mr. Turner had a great idea in the two committees that we should use, and that's the Finance Committee, and Mr. Burkhart, you happen to be the chairman of the Finance Committee, so it'll be up to you to call the first meeting.
We'll see.
And on the Safety Committee, that would be the other one, and Mr. Goss, you happen to be chairman of that one.
Yep.
So anytime you two gentlemen want to call your first meeting, well, we'd be glad to attend and hear what comes of that.
Very good. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Mr. Vice President,
Yeah, Mr.
I want to thank everyone for coming to the meeting with an open mind and listening and all the input, because this is something that I've dreamt of for years now. And it all started with first responder safety and has built from there. Thank you.
And thank you, Jerry.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jerry.
So are there any other questions? Just for the assignment, Larry, Monday night at 6 o'clock, the Finance Committee will be meeting. You're all invited because this will be on the agenda to discuss that, to hear it for the first time.
We can't be,
We can't all be invited.
just for,
Well, only the most important then.
Since I have the key to the office.
Be Tuesday night.
You need to come to the microphone and speak.
Monday's a holiday.
Just a quick reminder, Monday's a holiday, federal holiday, so Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Yeah, this is the government, that's right. All right. Hearing nothing else, I'll need a motion to adjourn.
I
Move.
second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.